me read to you the introduction that goes along with this week's part of this series. Our scripture speaks of storing up treasures in heaven. We see the treasures Jesus speaks of are riches that come with the outpouring of relationship, love, grace, and hospitality. These things are uncorruptible rather than the accumulation of things that become false gods. How we spend our treasures of time, energy, and money indicates what we love, what we value, and how we want to impact the world. This week, we are invited to become more courageous, more intentional, and more visionary about how we serve the world through what we spend. And so we begin with the second week of calling attention to spirituality and money. With the movie, It's a Wonderful Life as a guide for us. So we have George Bailey going through this very, very difficult time. He's misplaced, actually it was his uncle, misplaced $8,000 and the creditors are after him and everything has gone askew. And he's feeling like his life really shouldn't be. And so the angel Clarence comes and is letting him know that his life is of extreme purpose and value, just like all of yours. And he has opportunity, like most of us do not, to actually see what's missing if he's not there. So in part of the movie, what happens is Clarence takes him to see the town that they live in. And if you remember, if you've seen the movie, Pottersville, because remember last week we talked about Mr. Potter being the kind of ogre of the community and gathering and kind of almost stealing people's money, right? The town becomes his namesake, and it's really kind of a trashy place. And the town, as was developed when George Bailey was around, doesn't exist. And so he sees this huge impact, not only in town, but in the relationships that he's built. This is important to us as we look at the words that Dior read for us this morning from the Sermon on the Mount in the 6th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew. Stop collecting treasures for your own benefit on earth, where moth and rust eat them, where thieves break in and steal them. Instead, collect treasures for yourselves in heaven. And he goes on and says, thieves aren't going to get them there and all of that. And then this line, where your treasure is, your heart will be also. Jesus' invitation to us is huge when it comes to money. It's not just, he talks about money more than anything, right? It's not just a little, come on you guys, get it straight. He's really trying to help people understand, live a different way. So we're talking about this connection between spirituality and money and what impact it might have on our lives. Why is it important for us? So I have a thought experiment for you. Something to think about. Whether you're at the very beginning, the middle, or the last third of your life, how do you want to spend your time left? And the word spend includes not only how you want to spend your time, but also how do you want to spend your resources. Do it intentionally, is what Jesus is inviting us to do. Don't spend haphazardly. Don't just throw money at anything, but be intentional, because where your money goes, there your heart is also. That's clear in his message. So your thought experiment, how do you want to spend what time you have left? How then do you want to impact the world? And you might be thinking, no, that's not for me. I'm just so-and-so, I'm just Terri, I just live in Henderson, I just live in a townhouse. I'm really not going to have a whole big impact on the world, right? And this is exactly what George Bailey thought, that he wasn't going to have an impact on the world, and yet he does. And he was given a vision to be able to see that. But that is true for you as well. What kind of impact do you want to have? Because you can create that impact for your life in the world around you. There was an experience in the office of the church this week where a woman came and visited with Laura and said that she wanted to give a gift. And the gift is to be for later in the year, around the time where we often adopt families. And she wants to be a part of paying forward through this church because of an experience. Now get this. She came to the office this week. Her experience that she had from this church happened 15 years ago. I am here to tell you, you never know what kind of grand impact you might have. So her experience was she came here as a woman who was homeless, didn't have a job, needed all kinds of help. And because of your generosity and because of the way the office staff was working and because of many things, you were able to impact her life in such a way that she has now, and I'm sure it didn't happen by snapping her fingers and having this happen overnight, but she turned her life around. And now, 15 years later, has a job that sustains her in a way that she wants to pay forward a gift that you all were a part of creating for her own life. If that doesn't lift up for you the importance of what you do having an impact, I don't know what does. This is something that happens on this campus on a regular basis, where we have opportunity to hire people through the CDC or other means. We have workers, community service workers that come and have to work because somebody in the government or law enforcement that says you have to do this, and it impacts their lives, and they come back and say thank you and receive and share the impact. So this is such an important lesson for us. So in this thought experience, this experiment for you, how do you want to spend the time that you have left? What impact, or how do you want to impact the world? And if you think you don't, you come visit Pastor Samara or myself or any of the staff people, and we will help you get an understanding around this. And the last part of this thought experiment is to ask yourself, what doesn't really matter? Instead of trying to figure out what does matter, because that list can be huge, what doesn't matter? What can you let go of that isn't really necessary for you, for your relationship with money, for your relationship with God, connecting that spirituality and money? What doesn't matter? What might Jesus be inviting you to let go of? Because surely that is there too. When you think about this world and this whole focus of this series, but certainly of life from the Gospel of John, Jesus invites us to have life and to have it abundantly. George discovers that he makes a huge difference, not only in his community, but certainly in his family and with his loved ones. There is an effect that when we all understand this, when we collectively serve in this way, in a way of offering our gifts, our generosity with others, there's a synergy around that can't be stopped. It continues and it grows, and it's bigger than the sum of its parts, right? It's bigger than anybody could ever ask or imagine. Go back to Ephesians. That's what God does when we gather together. That's what happened 15 years ago. Just one person that I'm naming. It has happened to many, many others. So in this time, we're asking you to seriously and honestly look at spirituality and money. Find your heart center. Find how is your relationship with your heart and God in how you interact with the money that you have. And you might think that you're just tied in a tight ball and you don't have a lot of room to move around. And for some that is very, very true, and I understand that. But there is always room, I believe, to have a generous heart, to share the love that God has for you with others. And so there is the beginning of where we work from. So one of the questions again for us is, what feeds your heart center? What feeds your relationship with God? What feeds your understanding of being a generous person? Think about that. What feeds your generous heart? What makes you want to, as Jesus talks about, have your treasure and your heart heading in the same direction? Because that's where we're to live. So what is it that feeds that actually makes that happen? What does that heart center look like? What direction is it pointing? Is it pointing like Pottersville in the movie, where the main street is filled with nothing but darkness and sadness for people? Or is your heart center pointing in a way where you understand that you can, as an individual and certainly collectively as a group, every single person matters in this. Every single person is a part of that synergy that makes God's reality here true. So what direction is your heart center pointing? Jesus is pretty clear. You can't serve God and wealth. I think all of us probably know stories of people throughout the world who have done their serving of wealth badly, poorly. And we in the church try to bring to the forefront, what is it like? What does it mean to serve God? Because Jesus says we can have money, yes, and we can have retirement accounts. We can have roofs over our head, all of those kinds of things, right? But it's the how in there that sometimes gets messy in our world. In a little tiny country of Bhutan, one of their commissions in their government is inviting people to, instead of thinking of time as money that is so prolific in our society, everything is related to time as money, right? And oftentimes we don't want to give time because it costs us too much, or even the other way around. But most of the time we don't want to give because it costs too much. This little country has a lot to offer us. They say instead of thinking of time is money, think of time is life. And is that true for you? And if so, how is it then you spend, literally and figuratively, your time? How is it you spend your life? The series is inviting you to be intentional about how you do that. Really, really intentional about connecting those dots between spirituality and money, between spirituality and generosity, between money and love, between having the generous heart and the treasure that Jesus invites us to hold, but to not accumulate to some greater extent. Believing, I think, in this notion of time is life could have the impact of affecting your generosity. So I invite that again. Lots of questions this week, but invite that for your consideration. Can you be curious enough about this connection of spirituality and money, of your relationship with God and money? Can you be curious enough to see what might be created new there? For you, for this community, and for God. May you be blessed as you ask those questions and dive a little deeper, looking in before we look out. Amen.